We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is a workshop to discuss Economic Development Council and Opportunity Park. And John, are you going to kick us off?
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, this afternoon, and thank you all for giving us the opportunity to update you all on such short notice. Wakulla's Economic Development Council has rejuvenated itself over the last 4 years. Used to be a pretty formidable organization, but just with the economy and everybody getting older and just kind of went into hibernation for a while, and we decided about 4 years ago that we needed to rejuvenate it a little bit, which we've done. We currently have about 25 dues-paying members, and the organization is growing. We have realized that as one of the only all-volunteer EDC organizations in Florida, that our best opportunity for helping our community is to more fully market our county. We feel there's a need for a more diversified economy that augments our bedroom community and ecotourism economy. Last year, with the help of Opportunity Florida and Enterprise Florida, we developed an interactive website, which is at wakullaedc.com. It's our first attempt, our first move in this marketing strategy, and please check it out. This year, we're in the process of further implementing this strategy with an advertising campaign. We'll be featuring Wakulla County in the Business Journal of 850 magazine in their December issue. We'll be talking about our industrial parks, our improved transportation via 319, our quality of life, our schools, our improving situation on affordable housing of the gardens communities, and our new aquaculture industry. This ad campaign has been made possible because of grant support from Career Source Capital Region, Opportunity Florida, and Enterprise Florida, and our local business community. We'll be having about an 18 to 20 page spread in the magazine. Depending on how many more ads we get, we're already at that now. For every page of ads, we get a page and a half of editorial, and we're at right between 18 and 20 pages now with the commitments that we have. The size of our portion of the journal will come close to rivaling Leon counties, in that same magazine. We'll be right next to them, and I think that's real good. Real proud of our community. Again, this made possible by Career Source Capital Region, Opportunity Florida, and Enterprise Florida. We'll also be running separately full-page sponsored ads in the same magazine for 4 quarterly editions starting this fall, and each of those full-page ads will strictly highlight our 2 industrial parks, Opportunity Park in the northeast corner of our county, and the new park down in St. Mark's, Innovation Park. We think it's a pivotal time for Wakulla County with our much improved national economy, funding that's flowing into our county from Florida Department of Transportation, Northwest Florida Water Management District, Gulf Triumph funds, expansion plans at Wakulla Environmental Institute, and other grant sources that our county administration, I'm sure, is diligently working on. Opportunity Park and the new Innovation Park should benefit from all these positive influences, and Wakulla will benefit with better paying jobs. But we have to let folks know that we are here and that we're ready. Duke Energy's Site Readiness Program is intended to identify, assess, improve, and increase awareness of industrial sites in Duke Energy's 35-county service area here in Florida. The goal of the program is to increase the inventory of good industrial sites as well as to advance the readiness of these sites. Since the program's introduction in Florida in 2012, 18 properties have been evaluated and approved. Opportunity Park, I hope, is number 19. This brings us to the main subject of this afternoon's workshop and the folks that are going to present it to us. I'll start off with Mark Hoenstein. Mark, right back there. He's the Director of Economic Development for Duke Energy and is the guy that said, let's do this to this project. Mark is a graduate of FSU and currently lives in Windermere near Orlando. Prior to his 16 years with Duke Energy, he worked with Enterprise Florida and its predecessor, the Department of Commerce. He has served on about 20 different boards and committees all over the state on all different aspects of economic development. Then we have Lindsay Cannon, right here in the orange. Lindsay is the director of SiteQuest Solutions, which provides site selection and economic development consulting services to companies and organizations worldwide. With more than 10 years of experience in site selection and economic development, Ms. Cannon assists companies in identifying, evaluating, and selecting the optimal location for their capital investment. Ms. Cannon has earned a master's degree in public administration and a bachelor's degree in business administration from South Carolina. Currently, she's actively managing evaluation and or certification programs for Iowa Economic Development Authority, Duke Energy, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. Lindsay and Quest Solutions are based out of Greenville, South Carolina. And last but not least is Pat Gasway. Pat is a professional engineer with a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Louisville.
That's correct.
The guys that killed us in football 2 years ago. He's proud of it. He's president of Height Design, an approximately 40-person design group with 11 professional engineers that offer community planning, and land development engineering. Their projects literally blanket Pasco, Manatee, and Hillsborough counties with our home office in Tampa. And before I turn it over to Mark, I'd like to also thank, we have Richard Williams, the CEO of Opportunity Florida here, and Richard Fetchick with Appalachia Regional Planning Council, and Sandy MacArthur and Richard Exline, both with NG Wade. And again, I'd like to thank EDC for their support. So I'm turning it over to Mark. Thank you.
Sandy, you.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate this. It's great to be partnering with Wakulla County on our site readiness program. It's also great to be supporting Wakulla's effort to get the lineman school at Wakulla Environmental Institute at TCC as well. Today I wanted to give you a little background on the program before Lindsay and Pat get up to speak. As John mentioned, I'm part of the economic development team for Duke Energy. Our goal is to bring new business to the counties that we serve, bring new jobs and capital investment. And this program is one of the ways that we do that. So if we go back in time to when this program began in the early 2000s, the Carolinas were losing a lot of textile mills. And we were trying to figure out ways that we could help those communities to rebuild. And really, we looked at economic development as a resource for those communities. These companies were going overseas. We looked at the fact that there was a lack of ready sites to attract new business. So in response, in 2005, we partnered with McCallum Sweeney Site Selection, which is now Quest Site Solutions, to identify potential mega sites and assess industrial sites for their potential to target new industry. The program, as John mentioned, is now in its 13th year since 2005. In Florida, it started in 2012 when the merger with Duke Energy occurred. So again, it's to identify, evaluate, and improve potential sites. It's not a site certification program. It's actually the first step in certification of a two-step process. What the recommendations you'll get today are something you could take back and go for certification if you wanted, but it's really the recommendation stage in this for this program. Again, it's designed to get new sites or potential sites into your inventory in Wakulla County, or to help existing properties like Opportunity Park become more ready. In 2006, we added a conceptual plan part of the program, or buildable study program, and you'll be hearing from Height Design to talk about that today. So we've evaluated over 234 sites through this program since 2005, and that's in our 6-state territory: Florida, the Carolinas, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. It's been very successful. We fund the cost of this, so it's no cost to Wakulla County. It's all Duke Energy is funding this. If you look at the process, so it starts with Quest Site Selection, Site Solutions treats this just like a real project. They're working with real companies all the time, trying to find locations. So they go through an RFP process with the counties. This RFP for this process goes to the county. John received that, and then the county is then to complete that information and send it back to Quest. There are two, visits to the area. The first is a site visit to the site itself. The second one is where we are today for the final presentation. So it's great exposure for the county to have Quest and High Design to see what you have to offer. It's an educational opportunity for the local leaders. It's also an evaluation of strengths and weaknesses and then recommendations to come. I just want to thank you and your staff for the time you put in on this program. It takes a lot of effort to answer this RFP, go through this process. It's not easy. It's about 18-page RFP, so thank you very much. On the buildable study piece, I wanted to mention High Design will analyze this site and for the buildable areas and then show the potential for use and help the community to create a vision for what you might be able to do for this site. And it's also great information to include in those RFPs when you're responding to potential prospects that are looking at Opportunity Park. And as John mentioned, this is the 19th property in Florida that has gone through the program since 2013. In 2015, we had our first win with the 470 Park in Leesburg, which was the very first site to go through the program. They landed Core Slab, a manufacturer of precast concrete products. That created 55 new jobs, $10 million capital investment. That was just phase one. They're going to double that with phase two. All told, there have been 34 wins with this program around the 6 states since 2005, and those wins have led to 6,800 new jobs in on those 34 wins, $7 billion in capital investment, so it really works. Last thing I'll say is this program has also been recognized by many magazines as a top site program, very well respected, and Duke Energy has been named to the top utility economic development programs for the last several years by Site Selection magazine. Bottom line, a site that's gone through this program, and even more so that has implemented the recommendations that you'll hear, will be much more competitive than many of the sites that are out there today. So again, appreciate your time. I look forward to hearing the recommendations that are to come. And without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Lindsay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So most of the time we're going to be looking over here. So that way, all of you back there that get to look at my backside, you actually are going to watch the presentation. But no, I am happy to be here and want to start with the main thing. So afterwards, if you're like, what was that presentation about? You can go back to this. And the other thing that I would note is I will make sure John has a copy of this. So anybody here that wants a copy, John's your man. Find John. So attracting investment and jobs is more competitive than ever, and being prepared creates a competitive advantage. So at the end of the first part of the section, we'll come back to this and it'll make more sense. But I just want you to be thinking about that as we go through the presentation. So I'm going to talk about Quest Site Solutions and kind of how we've evolved into Quest. Then I'm going to talk about the site selection process. When we're actually working with a company looking to select a new location, what does that look like? Then I'm going to talk about site readiness, why it's important. And then we're going to talk about Opportunity Park, and I'm going to turn it over to Pat, and he'll go through his conceptuals. And then at the end, we'll open it up for some questions. So Quest Site Solutions, as Mark said, the program started with McCallum Sweeney Consulting. And back in this spring, the owner of McCallum Sweeney, Mark Sweeney, decided that he was going to retire and shut the company down. And so O'Neill, which is an industrial construction firm that works all over the country, decided that, hey, this is of interest to us. And so one of my other colleagues and I joined O'Neill in June, and we already had a relationship. So over the years, we have worked quite a few different projects with O'Neill. We did a large transformer facility that went to Memphis. We did a chemical project that went right outside of Savannah. So as McCallum Sweeney, we knew O'Neill very well. But the thing about that is O'Neill's a construction firm, and we didn't want to be just limited to the projects that O'Neill was working. We wanted to be able to do the same type of projects that we were working at McCallum Sweeney. So out of that came Quest Site Solutions. So as Mark said, we do site selection. Our primary business is helping companies decide where to locate new facilities. Primarily manufacturing, but some distribution, and also our office work is almost completely corporate headquarters. For the state of Florida, we, a few years ago, did the Hertz project that moved from New Jersey down to Florida. So have some notable wins in Florida over the years, but we are now Quest Site Solutions and are beginning to wrap up our website and finally roll that out. It's one of those things, when you transfer and you move, you don't necessarily have time to figure out all the naming, but we finally have gotten a name, we've gotten a logo, and we have a website, and we're getting ready to start rocking and rolling. So the site selection process, when we're working with a company, what does that look like? So first, it's profit driven. When a company comes to us and says, hey, we're looking to build a new facility, they're doing that because they want to make a profit. That's why companies are in business. They're also deadline driven, not only in deciding where that new facility is going to go, but also in getting it up and running. Because the faster they get it up and running, the quicker they're going to start making money. It's competitive. And up there it says multiple options. The options could be Greenfield Site A versus Greenfield Site B. It could be expand in an existing location versus build a new facility. Sometimes that competitive nature is just do the project or don't do the project. Companies are extremely risk averse. Again, it goes back to the profit driven. They want to go to the location that is the least risky, that they're most likely to make the profit in. And that goes throughout the process. I'll talk about that. But really, the risk averse is how can you, as a community, as the site, reduce the risk to a company that is looking in your area. And then finally, it's comprehensive. And it's easier to show you than to tell you how comprehensive the process is. And the goal is not to read all of the words on this slide. It's just to show you how much goes into the process. Up there you'll see financial. We're looking at what is the cost to build the facility, but we're also looking at logistics and transportation. We're looking at the site itself. We're looking at human resources as a workforce. So it's not just one item. It's all of those pieces of the pie that make up the site selection process. So what are the key drivers? The process is mainly the same no matter the different types of projects, because ultimately we're trying to get to one location. But the key drivers are what vary from the different types of projects. But two things we're always taking into consideration. Investment cost. What is the cost to actually get the facility up and running? And then operating costs over the long term. What is it going to cost to operate this new facility in the location? But then from there, that's where the drivers start being different. And the first one is manufacturing. When we're working our manufacturing projects, it normally is a group of contiguous states. We may be looking at the Southeast, the Midwest. And there we're looking at transportation infrastructure, getting the raw materials in and the product out, utility infrastructure, making sure that the utilities can meet that industrial demand, workforce, and then access to suppliers or customers. And then going all the way across, looking at the distribution facilities. Normally when we are doing a search for a distribution facility, our clients have a dot on the map, and that is their center of market. That is their ideal location for their distribution center. The issue is it's normally not in an ideal location. It's on top of a neighborhood. It's in the middle of, on top of a mall. It's not on a gorgeous industrial site to build a distribution facility. So we put a radius around that. Normally it's about 100 miles, and that becomes our search region for a distribution facility. We're looking at the access to customers and consumers, transportation infrastructure. Normally there, rail and interstate infrastructure are the most important to get that product in and out, and then also workforce. And then finally, for office headquarter projects, those are normally a group of metropolitan areas. We'll be looking at the Atlanta area, Chicago, Dallas. And for headquarter projects, there's normally a compelling strategic issue, and that is either access to air service, primarily international air service a lot of times, and then also workforce, the ability to recruit and retain talent. The one thing you will see that's up there on every single one of them is workforce. And the reason I put them in each of them and say they're a different driver is what you need for a manufacturing workforce is different than a distribution workforce, which is different from an office workforce. So while it's the workforce, what you need for each of those, the skills are different. This is what we call the site selection funnel. And the important thing here is that at the top of the funnel, there's a lot of sites that go in, but ultimately at the bottom, there can only be one location that is selected. There's only one winner when we do our site selection projects. So this is an example of how competitive that site selection process actually is. This is Project Snow. This was a real project, but I have changed the code name to make sure to maintain the confidentiality for this client. And on day one was our alignment meeting. That was our very first meeting with our client to find out about the project. We determined that the search region for this is going to be 12 states and 309 counties. The specs for this project were what we would call fairly simple. We just needed about 50 acres. It didn't have any large utility requirements. We only needed to be about 15 to 20 miles from an interstate. So we would expect a lot of submissions to come back to us. And we did. We received 121 sites. All of the states submitted. And then what we did is a desktop analysis. We take those 121 sites and go through them and put them in one of three buckets: retain, marginal, and eliminate. And we go to our milestone meeting with our client. And at that milestone meeting, we want to take all of those marginal sites, the ones in the middle, and move them up to retain. They're going to stay in the process, or move them down to eliminate. For this one, 16 sites out of the 121 were moved into that retain bucket, which means there were 105 sites cut at that milestone meeting before we even set foot on the ground. We go and we visit those 16 locations, and then we shortlist down to 8 in 7 states. And that's on day 86. So within 3 months of our first meeting with our client, we've gone from considering 309 counties down to 8 specific sites. As it sometimes happens, projects get put on hold. This project got put on hold, and then it ultimately got canceled. So it never made it from 8 down to 1, but ultimately, normally, as we finish this process, we would get down to the one location that was selected. So I said I changed the code name to protect confidentiality, so I do want to comment on confidentiality for just a second. Code names are not just for fun. They can be really fun to name. When we go to that alignment meeting with our client, that very first meeting, we get to the end and we say, okay, what are we going to call this project? Have you thought of a code name? Sometimes this is the longest part of the alignment meeting, because it's going to be public at some point who you are, so we have to think through that, and everybody has different opinions. So it could be fun, but that's not why we give projects code names. There could be financial implications. When we start a project, normally that final financial commitment has not been made by the company. They've said, go out, figure out where you would build this, how much is it going to cost to build it, and then we will give final approval. There could be SEC considerations, financial market impacts if they're publicly traded. Also, there's likely limited knowledge within the company. When we start, we have a pretty small core project team. And as we go through the process, we add people into the project team. But initially, even within the company, there's not a lot of people that know. For the competition, when we were doing the Mitsubishi project, we were out and there was a community that called us and said, hey, I don't know how to say this to you, but we have another consultant that has reached out that has almost the exact same specs as your project. That means we pick up the phone and call our client and say, do you know what's going on? And what happened is one of their competitors had gotten word that they were going to be building a new facility in the U.S. And so their competitor started looking and was also going to be building a new facility in the U.S. So all of a sudden it was a race to who could get to that final location first so they could be the ones that were going to build a certain transformer in the U.S. Disruption. And it says that they're to the existing workforce in existing locations. Think of all of us working at a corporate headquarters, and the rumor mill starts that the company is looking to relocate. What are we going to do? We're all going to update our resumes, and we're going to start looking for a new job. The company just does a feasibility study and says, you know what? We're good where we are. What's going to happen? Your best employees are already gone. And then finally, labor management relations. But the other thing I would say on confidentiality is making sure you maintain confidentiality to the very end. And it's normally not necessarily those of us in this room that are not maintaining the confidentiality. It's somebody has happened to say something to someone else who says it to someone else, who then finds out in a newspaper or some other public entity gets the name out there. One of the things that I do when I first name a project is I put a Google alert on that project name. So when it comes up in the newspaper, my first phone call is to the economic developer and said, I saw it in your newspaper, and they need to go figure out who said it and how to stop it. So the easiest thing is until the company is standing in front of a microphone publicly saying, this is who we are, don't say it unless you absolutely have to.
Sounds like the mom.
So the site selection process. So first is the planning phase. We may be involved as the consultant in this, we may not. This is really when the company is determining what's this project going to look like. And then in phase one, that's where we have the alignment meeting. That's where we're doing our analysis to determine our areas of interest. And then we send out our request for proposal. And then ultimately we get down to our candidate locations. And our candidate locations at the end of phase one, we're down to about a dozen, is ultimately where we would like to be, somewhere between 8 to 12. So then from there we do our community visits. Thank you, Mark. We're doing our location evaluation. So we're looking at their workforce. We're looking at their taxes and incentives at that point. When we're doing our comparative analysis, we're out visiting, we're doing our site visits, and we get down to our finalist locations. We're down to our 2 or 3 finalists. At this point, any of those 2 or 3 finalist locations could work for the project. So we go to phase 3. That is where we start our incentive negotiations. We're looking at some taxes and incentives at that point, but we are not really digging in and starting to negotiate until we're down to those finalist locations. We're also doing any final due diligence, and then ultimately in phase 3, we're getting down to the internal selection of the preferred location. We're getting down to that number 1. And then phase 4, we're working on wrapping everything up. We're doing the MOU. We're working on an announcement. And then we'll stay on for incentive capture support. So the thing with each of these is, who are you competing with at each phase? So in the planning phase, you're preparing to compete. Phase 1, you're competing against the minimum criteria. If we say we need 50 acres and you submit 42 acres, you're going to go into that eliminate pile. If we say we need to be within 5 miles of an interstate, we want to make sure you're within 5 miles of an interstate. And then once you get into phase 2, now you're beginning to compete against the other locations. We're comparing location A versus location B. And then phase 3, you're still competing with the other locations, but now it's on the project pro forma basis. It's on the actual cost. And what we do there is we have a pre-incentive spreadsheet. That's before we have any incentives. Spreadsheet B is the incentive spreadsheet. What are the incentives being offered? And then spreadsheet C is the after incentive value. What is actually the cost between the various facilities? So what are the role of incentives? They need to be part of the overall economic development strategy, but not the sole economic development strategy. They need to be designed to support your goals by meeting the needs and influencing the location decision of companies. So often we're seeing incentives, for example, a tax incentive for a company that's building a new facility that's going to be having a carry forward loss for the next 5 or 10 years. Whereas you're offering a tax credit that they're never going to be able to realize because of their carry forward loss. You want to make sure your incentives are enhancing the strengths of your location while also mitigating the weaknesses. And then they're important if they impact the prospect's decision. Are they moving the needle from spreadsheet A to spreadsheet C? Are they differentiating one location from another? So we will say to the community, here is your weakness. How are you going to address it over these other locations? For example, we may have 2 of our 3 finalist sites that already have rail to the property, and we need rail for this project. Whereas the 3rd site, maybe the rail is half a mile away. So our incentive request is going to be, how do you help us get the rail to this location? The other 2 sites already have it. So your weakness is to get rail to the property. And then also it increases in importance as the decision process proceeds. You won't necessarily know what the strengths or weaknesses of your location are when you first submit your site. It's working with the company through the process and finding out what your strengths and weaknesses are so you can help make sure your incentives address their needs. So what are some characteristics of successful communities? We'll start up there at the top. They have a strong strategic plan. They did a strategic plan. I feel like we should all repeat that like fast, 5 times quickly. Not that they have a plan that was done 5 or 10 years ago and it's just sitting on a shelf that nobody looks at. It's one of those you're constantly updating. How we did economic development 5 years ago is not how it's being done today. So you constantly need to be updating that plan and moving forward. You have a strong economic development office and team, and it's consistent. And by saying team, it's not just your sole economic development staff members. It's also your utility partners that are all over here. Making sure that they're involved in the process, making sure your workforce is involved, and also your private sector community. One of the things that we do when we are in the site selection process is when we get down to a smaller number, we do existing industry interviews. These are closed-door meetings between us and a plant manager or HR manager asking questions about the community. When I say to the economic developer in a community, okay, we're ready to set these up, I can tell if their private sector is involved because if they call me back in a day or 2 and said, hey, I have these all set up, ready to go, they're expecting your call and they know what to expect. If I have to call back and I'm saying, hey, how are you doing on setting up those existing industry interviews? And they say, well, I'm trying to find the right person at this company, and that company, they're trying to get permission to talk to you. There's probably not as much private sector involvement because they're not aware of the economic development process and why it's important. The other one there is the recruitment, retention, expansion, and entrepreneurship. It's not just about bringing new companies to the community. It's also about nurturing the ones that are already here, both your existing companies and the ideas that people have to create new companies through entrepreneurship. Workforce is an issue all across the country. Nobody has solved the workforce issue. So there's no magic crystal ball that I have that says this is what you have to do for your workforce. But the important thing is to be thinking about it and working on it. What are you doing to improve your workforce for the future? We've talked about flexible incentive programs, making sure that you can adjust those to meet the needs of various companies, not that what company A gets is the same thing that company B gets. And also you have product that's ready to go, so companies have somewhere to go. You have a variety of different building site sizes. So talking a little bit more about the product comes into site readiness and why it's important. We've talked about this. Companies are very deadline driven. And once they've identified that they need a new facility, they want to get it up and running as soon as possible. Therefore, they're looking for the sites that are ready for quick development. We used to have 24, 36 months to do a site selection project. Now I would say on average it's about 9 months, and a lot of times they start wanting something in 4 to 6 months. It's just they forgot to build in that approval process, so it gets drawn out. So most of them are about 9 months. And the communities with the ready sites, Those are the ones that are having the competitive advantage. They stay in that site selection funnel longer. So here I have circled that request for proposal or web research when we talk about the various phases. When we have an actual project and we send out that request for proposal, we normally start with the state and send it there, and we give them 2 weeks to complete it. By the time they assign a project manager, that project manager gets it out to the community. The community may only have a few days to collect the information before they have to get it back to the state to get it back to us. When we do the Duke program, we give the communities 4 to 6 weeks to complete the same information that we would request on an actual project. So you have the time to find the information and collect it and determine who you need to talk to for each of the things. Oh. Okay, there we go. So levels of site readiness. So you start on the left-hand side with just raw land. You just have a piece of property, somebody owns it, you don't really know any information about it. So then you take the first step and you get into Duke Energy's Site Readiness Program. Now you've collected information on the property. You know about the utility information. And then from there you take the next step into having a certified site. It means all the questions on a property have been addressed. You've reduced the risk. The due diligence has been completed. All the way over to the very end is that either you have a building being constructed or that building is ready to be constructed. So as you can see, you want as many of your properties to be on the far right-hand side of that screen than you do over here on the left-hand side. But it's not going to happen overnight. You just have to slowly keep plugging at it and moving those along to get them more ready. So benefits of ready sites. 1, it allows for effective proactive marketing, getting the word out about your property. For better reactive marketing, that's about responding to those requests for proposal when they come in. You know about your site's strengths and weaknesses. There's no perfect site out there. You'll be able to offer development assistance as may be needed because you'll know what those strengths and weaknesses are. By having your due diligence completed, that speeds up the development schedule because there's less risk involved. So then these properties that are going to, as the previous slide, all the way to the right-hand side, the more prepared your properties are, these offer a company a minimum development schedule and minimal risk, so they can get up and running quicker. So how readiness can impact a company financially. This is a fun little slide, and we have to make some assumptions here. Our first is that all cars cost $35,000. We don't get to customize them. We don't get to do anything with them. They're one price. The other is we snap our fingers and there's going to be a new automotive facility that produces 100,000 vehicles annually, which we're going to assume just 8,000 cars per month. So that's looking at about $280 million in sales per month. If you can get a company up and running 3 months faster than another location, that's $840 million in additional sales. 6 months faster, $1.7 billion, and 12 months, you're up over $3 billion in additional sales. Cars are fun because they give you billion-dollar numbers, but it's the same thing with anything. If you have the finance guy on the team and you're telling him, we can get you up and running 12 months faster, it goes back to one of the very first things I said. If they get up and running faster and they have these additional sales, they're making additional profit. And that's really what it's about when a company's building a new facility. So some examples of when readiness paid off. The first is Severcore Steel in Columbus, Mississippi. Rural community. And this was the first site that went through the TVA mega site program that achieved certification. So a mega site is 1,000 plus acres for a single user. They went through, there was a lot of press around them achieving certification as a mega site. The CEO of Severcore Steel saw the announcement, called the economic developer in Columbus, Mississippi, Joe Max Higgins, and within a few months, they had an $800 million investment in 450 job facility in 2005. Not everything happens in 3 months. He just got really lucky on that. So we have example number 2. But he did. He had all the information ready. So example number 2 is GT Tire in Chester County, South Carolina, just south of Charlotte. Also another rural community. And this was actually one of the first sites that went through Duke's site readiness program when the program was started in 2005. Went through and said, you know, you have some potential here, but you have some work to do. They went back, they kept making their way through that slide that I showed earlier and getting the property more prepared. And eventually we certified it at McCallum Sweeney. We were in the process of talking to them about recertification when they actually stopped answering our phone calls and emails. And it's because a few months later they announced a $560 million and 1,700 job tire plant on this site. And the thing about this site is they were the runner-up numerous times. But they kept working on getting this site more and more prepared until they ultimately landed GT Tire. And then Mark always steals my thunder, but I'll put this up here. This is the core slab that he talked about a little earlier, the first site readiness win in Florida, and as Mark said, they have already announced an expansion to the facility, so a big success down here in Florida. I was really good with the clicker for a while, but now it keeps taking off on me. So remember the main thing, we talked about this earlier. We've come back around to it. Attracting investment and jobs is more competitive than ever. That really gets to the site selection piece of it. And being prepared creates a competitive advantage. One of the things you're doing is participating in the Duke Site Readiness Program that is going to help give you that competitive advantage. So now we're going to talk about the site. Mark went through this, I think, earlier as well, or maybe John did, about the program goal. But I'll read it again for you. Identify, improve, and increase awareness of industrial sites in the region that are best suited for new manufacturing facilities in Duke Energy's targeted growth segments. This was the program goal back when the program was started in 2005, and it remains the goal still today. That's 200 plus dots that Mark talked about that have gone through the program, but it just shows you visually all of the properties that have participated in the program. So the Opportunity Park that we're here to talk about today, I think most everybody knows where it is, but if not, you can see it outlined down there in red, close to the county line, and you could see the proximity to Tallahassee. And then drilling in just a little bit to the aerial, there you can actually see the property outline. So just to orient everybody on the site and where we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes.
That road's not named after me, by the way.
I don't know why.
I was accused of that, but it's not.
Sandy made that clear when I met him.
I would claim it if I was you.
He's got one at Walmart. You can't have two, right?
So what we do for the site readiness program is we break it into categories. We break it into site versus park. Site is for a single user. Park is for multiple users. And then we break it down by site size. Because what a 100-acre park is not the same thing that a 700-acre park is going to need in terms of utilities. So for Opportunity Park, they fit into that general industrial park category. So you'll see me as we go through reference some specs on utilities, and that's where those come from, is we're evaluating it based on some set criteria since we don't have an actual project. So for this evaluation, we've lumped it into the 3 categories. This is kind of how we do it when we have an actual project, and I talked about earlier, we have that retain, that's the green, those are strengths, and then we kind of have those eliminate categories. Those in this case would be kind of the weaknesses. And then there's that marginal or yellow where it's somewhere in between or information may not be known. And it could be items such as in some instances it may be a strength and in other cases it may be a weakness. And then the column on the right hand side are the different categories that we're going to walk through. So first, you have a lot of acreage. There's 240 acres. It's controlled by a single landowner, NG Wade Investment Company. Landowners willing to sell or lease the property, but just note there that the preference is to lease. You already have a company located within the park. One of the things we see a lot of times are companies don't like to be the very first one in an industrial park. They like to follow somebody. So the fact that you already have someone out there is a great advantage. The future land use designation is industrial. The zoning classification is planned unit development. And the PUD, it was originally approved in 93, and it's been extended until April 2033, and it allows for 1.9 million square feet. So those are all, you can see over there on the left, it's a little hard to see, but those are all in the green. Those are all strengths of the property. So now moving on to the marginal. So the majority of the property is in FEMA Flood Zone X. That's outside of the 100 and 500 year floodplain. But there are 45 acres in the eastern portion of the property that are within the 100-year floodplain. So we just note that there is some within that 100-year. This is the next one. The existing roadways are present throughout the park. This is one of those that it could be a strength. If it provides access to a certain parcel for a company, that could be a strength. If it's a company that wants a configuration that doesn't fit into the existing configuration with the roadways, that may be a weakness because, then the roadway may need to be torn up. So that's one where it could be a strength, it could be a weakness. So that's why we put it in the yellow category. There's been no, I'll say recent due diligence studies have been completed on the property. And what this says to prospects is it's a risk. Since the due diligence has not been completed, we're not sure what could come up. We don't think anything. It's likely that there might not be anything, but we don't know for sure until that due diligence has been completed.
Due diligence looking for what?
So you're looking...
Clear title?
So there's 5 main due diligence studies. You have your phase 1 environmental. You have your geotech looking at soils. You have your bugs and bunnies, your endangered species. You have your archaeological, historical, and then wetlands are your main 5. And then on the IPAC report, the site has the potential for 7 threatened or endangered species. There's no known presence on the property, but again, your endangered species has not been done. And we just note that there are 7. Down here in Florida, you've learned to live with some of your endangered species and how to mitigate those. But the thing there is if you have a company that's not as aware about being able to relocate them, or in the event that it is a severely endangered species, there could be some issues, and companies sometimes just don't want to take on that risk.
How long is a typical endangered species study good for? A year, 2 years, 3 years, 5?
It varies from county to county, actually. Some counties like it not to be any greater than 18 months because of the change in occurrence, right? So some bad things can move in, or some things that you have may not be there any longer.
And that doesn't necessarily mean for a project that you need to update that every 18 months. That's the validity period. But I would say every, few years, or as circumstances change. Like if it's been 10 years, definitely need to update it. We normally say we like to see studies within the last 5 years for most of these. Like a phase 1 environmental, that's only good for 90, 180 days at most. But again, it's just making sure, how recent is it?
And there's actually some real benefit. Sorry, I don't mean to
No, you're
walk
fine.
on it, but
If you don't mind, if you'll come up to the microphone, because we record these as well, so.
absolutely. Sorry, I'm sure your clerk is having a fit. I'm Pat Gasaway with Height Design. One of the benefits of having a due diligence study, even though it has a short lifespan, you keep it on file. So when someone wants to know what the answers were, that's a good indication of what to expect in the future.
Well, something like the wetlands probably isn't going to change. I mean, that's...
You'd be surprised. They do tend to, but same answer is true. If you knew what it was, it's a good indication of what may be.
It goes back to reducing that risk. If you've had it done, even if it was outdated, you at least have some idea that the risk is lower. So looking at transportation, property is about 15 miles from the Tallahassee airport. Here's one for transportation that the park internal roads are already in place, so you can access those parcels. It's 17 miles from I-10. This is in the yellow because a lot of times for our manufacturing clients, we're looking within 10 miles of an interstate. So in this case, you would never even make it past that initial screening if the requirement was within 10 miles of an interstate. So that's why I have it yellow. And then I have up there that property is not served by rail. Again, it's not necessarily a weakness. It just means you're not going to be, this property is not going to be competitive for any projects that need rail. So this is really exciting. This is utility adequacy and capacity, and these are the strengths and the green. So that's a lot of green up there for your utilities. So I'll run through these pretty quickly, but just they're all very positive. So Duke has distribution lines adjacent to the property boundary. Current infrastructure, you can get 2.5 megawatts, but by shifting a few loads, you could get up to 5 megawatts within 6 months. Also, the electric feeder is on the grid investment plan for upgrades next year, and redundant service will be available in 2018. So you already have the service there, but it's actually going to be even improved in the coming months. You have an 8-inch water line that can provide 1,500 gallons per minute. It's already at the property boundary. The water treatment plant is right across Commerce Boulevard from the property and has an excess capacity over 2 million gallons per day. There's an 8-inch wastewater line with 355,000 gallons of excess capacity, also along Commerce Boulevard, and the wastewater treatment plant, which is also adjacent to the property, also has the same excess capacity of that 355,000 gallons. CenturyLink is a telecommunications provider, and they have underground fiber in the area with service available within 30 days. So from a utility standpoint, you are set.
What about the natural gas?
We're going to get there. We haven't forgotten about it. So one of the things I will note here, and I only noted it here because I put it as a strength on the previous slide, is that this is a more rural location for electric. So there has been some they have a little bit higher number of outages and durations. But the positive to that is there's improvements in the future. So we've had some questions over natural gas, as you pointed out, and we've gotten some answers over the last few days, actually, as we're coming into this. I was on vacation last week, so not all of this necessarily got updated with all the most information. But both the City of Tallahassee and TECO both have natural gas lines, and as we just learned a few minutes ago, there has been a recent TECO line that extends all the way to the nursery greenhouse facility in close proximity to the site. The question that this is still yellow is that the exact details of how the cost and schedule, but we're going to still keep working on that. You'll see in the recommendations to be able to nail down those cost and schedule estimates. But we have learned that natural gas is in much closer proximity than we originally even thought. So with another week or two, that yellow right there should hopefully move up into the green. So from a startup schedule, getting a facility up and running, electric service can get there within 6 months. The water line's already adjacent and just needs to be extended into the site. Same thing with wastewater, and telecommunications can be provided within 30 days. The estimated schedule to provide natural gas service is currently unknown, but we're working on the answer to that. And with TECO having the line right there that they've recently installed that goes to the greenhouse nursery area, that should be able to be moved up into the green. So the last on the startup schedule is the due diligence no due diligence studies have been completed on the property. So again, that just faces an unknown because you don't know what's going to be discovered in those that may slow down a project as they are working on their construction schedule. So site cost, again, most of this is in the green. Electric service should be able to be provided with little to no cost to the customer based on Duke's revenue credit. A price per acre has been established for the property. Water and wastewater lines are already to the boundary and will only need to go into the site to a new facility. Telecommunications infrastructure is already there, and so then the only thing is natural gas. But again, once we nail down some of those, that should be able to be moved up into the green since it is in close proximity. So for community workforce, normally at this point in a project, we're comparing location A versus location B. Well, for this program, we don't have location B or location C, so we compare everything to the state of Florida average. So you can see up there, one of the things is the county has had no union elections since 2005. Awesome news. And here in Florida, you don't have a lot of union activity, but that's still something we look at for our projects. High school attainment in the county is higher than the Florida average. It's at 87.7% versus 87.2%, so just slightly higher. Your percentage of workforce employed in manufacturing is 14% for the county, a rate that's higher than the states at 4.9%. Those are the 2006 numbers, and you'll see them referenced in the next one. They have not finalized the 2017 numbers. They're all preliminary, and we like to go with the ones that have been finalized. The county had slightly less overall job growth over the past 3 published years, 7.1 compared to 7.9. You're still super close, but because it was lower, I put you in the yellow. You got the benefit of being a little higher on the high school attainment, so it went up in the strengths. But then the other one down here, the bachelor's degree attainment. The county is at 16.6%, and the Florida average is 27.9%. This is a little bit of a red flag when we are doing our initial screening. We'll be looking for certain, depending on the skill need of our projects, we'll be looking at the country on a county level at the bachelor's degree attainment.
You are screening out the prisoners, right?
I'm pretty sure, but I actually do not know that for sure, but I don't think they're counted in your workforce or population.
Our census, didn't it? Prisoners included?
Yeah, they're in the census, but they're not in the labor data.
Okay, so they are not in. That's a very good question. I actually have never had that come up to know. So very.
We're on top of our job.
But I think the thing here is being able to sell your proximity to Tallahassee. So while your county may be lower than you would like, this is one of those things when I talked about workforce, something that you can work on. So work on raising this, but also market your proximity to Tallahassee and all of the education institutions in that area. So for the marketing slide, what I look at here is what are your key strengths and key weaknesses. So one of the key strengths is you have an existing park with infrastructure already completed. That's fabulous. Most of the time when we are doing these, we're trying to figure out how to get the utilities to the site. How do we get the roadways in? You already have those all addressed. You're able to have a quick startup schedule and low startup cost, again, because all of those things are already in place. Your proximity to Tallahassee and to Florida State among the other higher education institutions. So what are some of the things that may get you knocked out of contention? The property being 17 miles from I-10, we talked about that a little bit earlier. We're going to talk about this when we get into the recommendations, but you also don't have a full-time economic developer. You are super blessed to have a great volunteer board and John who dedicates his time, but John is a volunteer. You don't have that full-time economic developer that is out proactively selling the community. And then we talked a little bit about this, is being able to provide the available skilled workforce. And I think part of this is perception, and it goes back to those numbers that we just looked at, because we were looking at those on a county basis. So at times, you are going to be evaluated on your county, but from a marketing standpoint, being able to get that message out about your proximity to Tallahassee, and we'll look at it in just a minute, and you'll see some of the population numbers on a site-specific basis, and it really tells the story. And then this one I put up here is the other, because there's going to be some prospects that are going to steer away from Opportunity Park because of the location of the prison. Others see it as no issue. But again, it's on a case-by-case basis, so for some it may not be an issue, whereas others it will. So that's why I put this in the yellow category. So what are some of the short-term recommendations? So one of the things that we really struggle with and looked at is the zoning map. So after looking at it for quite a while and thinking, oh, is it off? on the county zoning system, a tax parcel or the parcel can only be shown as one zoning classification. And in this case, Opportunity Park is actually 4 parcels, and the parcels are partly agriculture and partly the PUD zoning. And what this happens is, even if you showed that Opportunity Park is the correct zoning, if I go to the county map,
Property appraiser's map.
yes, and I look at the zoning, now there's a conflict. And I'm saying, okay, which one's correct? So
I don't think the zoning's not on the property appraiser's site, right, Summer?
Not on the tax roll assessment, but they do have a link to a zoning
I
map.
was just trying to figure out what you were talking about.
yeah, and we could show it a little bit later. I can provide that to you later, showing the differences in what it actually is. But what that presents is there's a difference between what it actually is and how it's being shown. So that puts a question mark in prospects' mind. Is, okay, you're saying it's this, but if I go to your county system, I'm seeing it differently. Does that make sense? Okay. So the next one is natural gas. We're, again, working on that. We've gotten some answers on natural gas over the last few days. And we're going to get the natural gas questionnaire completed so those questions have been answered. An updated infrastructure map. One of the ones that we saw was hand-drawn, and we've recently learned that there's been some natural gas extension in the area. So again, it's making sure that you're putting your best foot forward and making sure you have the most up-to-date materials. And one of those things is having a current map that shows the location of all the utilities with the sizes. And that goes back to, you have so much infrastructure that is already in the ground at the property boundary, making sure that you're showing that in a 2018 up-to-date map. And then also a lot of the files, as Pat and I were going through trying to find things, is we don't have a lot of electronic versions of documents and databases. There's been a lot of work on this property over the years, but a lot of it has not been recently, so there's not that up-to-date electronic information. So that's one of our other short-term recommendations, is beginning to compile that information electronically. And one example I just put up there is a survey of the property as a CAD file, so people like Pat can manipulate it in AutoCAD.
Who would typically complete these tasks? The property owner trying to sell the property, or the government?
So I would say this is a mix. I think it could be either or. I've seen, county economic development organizations take this on. I've seen property owners take this on. I think that it could be either or.
I mean, number one, I can certainly understand.
Yes, that would
County.
definitely be the county.
Sir, you'd like to come up?
Real quick, I was able to stop by Edward Brown Surveyors today, and I have a CD with CAD files that we needed.
Mark that off your list then.
See, we are already implementing our recommendations.
Instantaneous application.
Yes.
Jerry, I worked at Edwin Brown's when they did that survey. I knew you were going to be curious about it.
Are you the one that named the road?
No. That's one of Sandy's friends, apparently.
You've been working so many places.
Mother. Mother.
It's kind of scary.
Mary Stewart is.
It's good when you've already started, you're already taking care of some of these recommendations before we even get to the end. So actually I'm going to go back, because there's one that's not up here that we were talking about earlier, that making sure the site is in various site databases. So one of those, Enterprise Florida has a site database that you can put their site on. You put your site on and it has all of the information. Making sure that you are putting your site out there on the various databases so it can be searched, so that you can get some of those leads into the community. Yeah.
Real quick, we've had cases where we did not have sites in a database that we know would have matched the project, and we found out too late because Enterprise Florida, for example, didn't know that we had that site. Therefore, we just didn't get a call. So that's key. That has got to be done, or I'll guarantee you're missing chances.
And a lot of times the project managers for the state, the first place that they're going to go is their own database to look for those sites. So that's probably even number one up there is the low-hanging fruit, is making sure you're getting your site in those databases so it can be found.
What databases? Give me an example.
The enterprise
Enterprise.
part. So they have a site database. Some of the larger real estate ones, for example, you may have heard of like LoopNet, or some of, those are bigger ones. But I would say number one is the Enterprise Florida database. So some of the longer term recommendations, having that full-time economic developer, and it says really that proactive marketing. Because you can respond to the reactive, but you want to get the word out, not just about Opportunity Park, but about your county. Being able to tell site selectors such as myself, making sure you're in front of the Enterprise Florida project managers on a regular basis, that you're going to the various conferences. And the thing that I would note there, I was telling them earlier today, one of my first jobs out of college, I was the marketing director of a credit union, and they hadn't funded my position for a while. And so they funded the position of the director of marketing, but I didn't have a marketing budget. It's really hard to do marketing without a marketing budget. I would say the same thing here is when you're looking at hiring an economic developer, it's not just their position. You want to make sure that they're going out and selling the county outside of just this community. They're also the ones that can start building those relationships with various partners. They're going to be the ones that are talking to the utility partners that are behind me on a regular basis, making sure that they're telling these utility partners what they're doing, what they're working on, what the county has. So that's one thing I would say is definitely just that full-time economic developer. Again, no offense to John here, you are so lucky to have someone that's willing to do that on a volunteer basis. The other thing that I would say is a site-specific workforce analysis, and we'll get to this in another slide or two, is because I think this site and its proximity to Tallahassee, being able to tell the workforce story of this site in particular. And then we talked about having the due diligence completed on the property, so I have the list of the studies that we talked with earlier.
Anybody here knows Elva Peppers? She could do all those, except the geotech, right, John? And the geotech, we have a USDA soils map that's pretty, not super detailed, but I'm a civil engineer, so I don't know if you want somebody to go dig holes everywhere out there, or you want to just go by the...
So the soils map gives you, is kind of like that 10,000 foot view, and as you do the geotech, it's going to give you more details. I mean, you don't have to go out there and do, 100 soil borings.
Actually pretty accurate, that
but
USDA map.
Do a few of this. But a lot of it is telling you some of that load bearing specific to it. Like, because when, we're working a project, that's one of the first things they ask us, like the construction firm will ask us is, can we see a geotech report to start building foundations and working on that. So these are the longer term recommendations. These are longer term because they're also they're the ones that are going to cost more money. The other ones are the shorter term or less costly. So last, we're going to look at some potential end users for my portion before I turn it over to Pat and y'all get to listen to somebody else talk. So for this, we looked at the site-specific conditions, the strengths and weaknesses, the site selection drivers and key characteristics of various industries, the workforce, existing industries. And for this, we considered two different target industries. One is Duke Energy's, they have a business recruitment team. And so we looked at the industries that business recruitment team covers, and then also looked at any of Enterprise Florida's target industries that were separate from those. So I will point out these should not be used as hard and fast rules. If it's up there, or if it's not up there and you get a lead for it, you still submit on it. You don't say, oh, well, it wasn't on the potential end users. You still submit if you're a good fit for that project. So this is what I was talking about on the site-specific workforce analysis. So this is just looking at the population drive time map. So within 15 minutes of the site, there's about 15,000 people. If you drive an additional 15 minutes, so you're now at 30 minutes, you're picking up 164,000 people. You went from 15,000 to 164,000.
That's why I don't go to Tallahassee.
45 minutes, you're at over 300,000. But when you're selling being able to find a workforce for this site, that's what you're selling as your drive times. Your 30 and 45-minute drive time that gets you all the way to the other side of Tallahassee.
Who lives out in the middle of the national forest?
But that's not unusually high, is it, compared to other cities?
No, it's not, but what, compared to your county numbers, your county numbers aren't taking into consideration Tallahassee. And so that's why being able for this site to be able to sell the proximity to Tallahassee and to get those numbers. Because if I'm just looking at it, oh, it's in the county, and the county doesn't have these numbers, that's where it's like, oh, well, we may not be able to find that workforce if I haven't run the site-specific drive time yet, because that's farther along in the process.
That was going to be one of my questions is, if you remove this site a quarter of a mile north, your demographics totally change, right, as far as the percent graduating. And I don't know if that was taken into account, that it's so close to the county line, it's really going to overlap, because probably a lot of people work at prison live in Leon County, not in Wakulla County.
And that is where I think that full-time economic developer has to go out and tell that story. Because there's no way for me to know that unless it makes its way through the process and I start running these drive times. But a lot of times it's not going to get to this point because I'm looking at it at county level information. But if you had someone that, you know, look at me, I'm here now I know. Like, look, this site has, you know, when you get a 30, 45-minute drive time, has a lot larger population to pull for a workforce.
And it's critical also to always measure this in minutes, not in miles. Very critical. Don't ever go to the mileage.
So some of the potential end users, these are the target industries that the Duke Energy business recruitment team covers. So you see advanced manufacturing. This is a high target industry, especially the proximity to FSU and Tallahassee. And FSU, for some of the research that they're doing, is there something that they're doing that an industry could complement that or pull off of that? You see that with a lot of your larger higher education institutions.
Duke Energy probably love a new high magnetics lab for a customer.
Never get any more.
So the next few are all low. So we'll start with aerospace. This is pretty self-explanatory. We don't have a runway. Makes aerospace a little bit difficult. Automotive, you're outside of that central supplier network. It's farther north. For chemicals, the PUD excludes chemical facilities. Therefore, it's a low.
We have a springs protection zone that would never allow a chemical plant.
So data centers, because of the more rural nature of this location, there's limited electric capacity, or they prefer closer to a metropolitan area. Does it mean you're never going to get it? No, it just means there may be other locations that has a more robust existing electric network.
Is that like a server farm or something?
You're seeing a lot of different types of data centers. You're seeing the big Facebook, and then you're also seeing the co-location. So you're seeing a variety of different that would fit into the data center.
Ones that a lot of them are building around areas with dams because of cheap hydroelectric power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, data mining. Yeah, okay.
Food and beverage, again, it kind of fits into the data centers with the electric, but it's the limited wastewater availability. Does it mean that wastewater could not be expanded? Yes, it could be, but that's costs time and money, whereas there may be another location that already has a large number of excess capacity. Life sciences, there's just not a large concentration in the area, and normally you see life sciences follow in kind of cluster areas. Plastics, there's a large overlap with chemicals in the plastics, so I put that it probably would be excluded by the PUD for that. And then technology I put as a medium, because there may be an opportunity for manufacturing of technology components. So the next is just wrapping up the Enterprise Florida. These are the ones, they have some others, but they overlapped with the Duke. So these are just the ones that Duke did not have. And most of these are low. Defense and Homeland Security. You're right smack in the middle of all the stuff to the west and then all the stuff to the east in Jacksonville, but you're just not close enough to either of it. So I said for that, I think probably most of your defense and homeland security would go one of the other directions. Finance and professional services, a lot of those are going to your larger population centers. Logistics and distribution, your distance to the interstate is going to limit some opportunities. Clean tech, the energy industry is evolving right now. So I think leveraging some of the research from FSU and some of the other trends in the energy sector. And then headquarters, again, those are normally larger population centers.
So that takes out Amazon coming to Wakulla.
I don't want to say never, but probably never.
Where are they going?
We'll see. No, I don't. I will go on the record and say they are not my client.
I think they're going to go in Duke's area, right?
They're hoping.
Right, that's right, that's the word.
So you've heard enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Pat at this point.
Question before you go.
Sure.
One thing that you didn't really mention is the government side of it. And I believe this PUD has like a streamlined site plan approval process.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, does that go into the equation? Wouldn't that be something we'd put into the green category?
That would be, yeah, that would be in your startup schedule, that you could be able to do that process quickly. So yes, that is a good point.
So we should be selling that as well, because that might get us quicker to turn the lights on.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
That's risk.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of words all in a row, isn't it? My name's Pat Gasway. I'm the president of Height Design. We've been in Tampa since 1943. This is just my watch. I didn't start the company. In this pursuit, we've been very fortunate to partner with Duke now for 3 years in this site selection, site readiness program. We've evaluated a bunch of sites over the last 3 years, and this is a first for us, because my normal speech, where I have to explain to you that it's wildly important to have the landowner and the county invest hard dollars in infrastructure to be able to outpace others in this foot race, usually is the worst news I give. In this particular place, you've already done the heavy lifting. And that, to me, is a fantastic message to take away from this. We'll talk a little bit about the site. This is a general site plan that our firm prepared. It shows the entirety of the site, shows the various sites that we, in talking with Lindsay, seems like that this kind of location is going to be well suited to a majority of smaller users, as opposed to one single large user or a series of large users, especially given the decisions made in the investment in the infrastructure. Roads are in, water's in, sewer's in. Those things already exist, and so without having to rebuild infrastructure in a different configuration, we would suggest you serve various users with the existing park infrastructure. It's the wisest move. I see what you mean, Lindsay. See if I can do this one at a time. This is just a blow up, and I'll call a few things to the attention, just so you're familiar. Commerce, and this is the CSG site, the existing site here. This blue dashed line there, that is the FEMA floodplain that shows up currently. The nature of that does not preclude development. The idea there is that you can't reduce the volume or affect adversely anybody off-site that would be affected by filling in those floodplains.
Is a Loma possible on that, you think? Or
Absolutely. This particular area here in dark green is what we were showing as the volumetric floodplain mitigation that could be used in order to allow everything outside that area to be developed. So that's a way, that's one thing that you might consider. Again, you know, all the land within that dashed blue line would have an effect on diminishing that volume of floodplain. And so if you created a hole in the ground here, we call them floodplain mitigation areas, but it's basically a hole in the ground, so that it can afford the missing volume that would be lost when you develop these parcels here.
Do you know if that flood line just came off a FEMA map, or somebody actually went out and surveyed the contour line, contour line?
Those are not driven by contour lines. In fact, they're contrary to some contour lines when you overlap the two. It is a generalized line, but with the FEMA regulations that you'll be dealing with as you get your FEMA letter of map revision or map amendment, you'll be dealing with that line, not the floodplain limits that we would arrive at if we followed the contours.
I've seen a lot of times people will do a LOMA and they'll actually figure out what contour line it's at and take a lot of that property out of the flood zone.
A very common practice nowadays, of course, regulatory matters have never gotten better, they always get worse. The nature of the flood studies that FEMA is requesting, there's one consultant nationwide that processes all of these, and our experience here in the last 2 years has been significantly more rigorous in their evaluation of that volumetric loss to make sure that there's not any adverse effects off-site. When we look at this particular parcel, this site here, just for scale, that's a 200,000 square foot user. This is an existing 75,000 square foot user. This site, we have several examples of 50,000 square foot users, several examples of 75,000 square foot users, and along with the 200,000 square foot user, that shows that this park could be able to accommodate a lot of different users over its lifetime with a good bit of flexibility and never have to replace one piece of that infrastructure you've invested in. That's a very handy tool. In the remainder of this, Lindsay's given you all the other good news. See if we can, there we go. Again, what we do here is we blow this up just a bit. This is the northwest quadrant. There's that 200,000 square foot user and your existing facility. Again, these march through here with just various examples that we've used in order to reflect, a 50 or 60 or 75,000 square foot facility and how easy they are to fit within the existing infrastructure.
One more question, if I could.
Sure.
All these, of course, have to have their own stormwater treatment.
Yes, sir.
There is no centralized pond.
That's correct.
Could they use, the MacArthur's use part of that floodplain to make a centralized pond? That would, I would think, be a great advantage to not having to have a pond on every parcel.
There's two different matters in play here. For example, that blue pond right there probably isn't blue because it probably wouldn't hold water up in this kind of soil stratum. But this is, in effect, an impact. It is a fill within the floodplain. So everything from this line in on that site would be considered an impact to the floodplain. That's what that hole in the ground is for, and that one common and jointly used mitigation facility solves all of the various developments that are within that area. So that would be a wise thing to do if you wanted to avoid the incremental cost, or even worse, if the first guy that comes in is this guy, and in order to offset that, if he had to build all of that, it's an onerous cost, right? Too big a nut for one guy to have to overcome. But if this facility were constructed, then all of these facilities would be home free. When you look at, this is the wastewater treatment plant's right over here. This is in the southeast corner. Again, in the topography here, the rear of those particular parcels were just the logical place to go. It's always better to put ponds on the bottom instead of up on top of the hill. It's just basic stuff that most people, most of professionals would end up suggesting to their client. There's a million ways to skin these individual cats. Each of these site plans are similar, somewhat different. Each facility owner will have particular requirements that they have for amount of loading space, dock high, not dock high, how much parking that they need to have on each of their facilities. So all of these are potentially different when each one comes in. But the moral of the story here is the investment in infrastructure that you've made satisfies all of these various users and doesn't require reconstruction of that prior investment. This is actually a blow up of the chart that's up in the upper right hand corner. It shows all of these various parcels, shows the acreages of them all, adding all of the potential usable building areas on all those parcels. You're down here at about 1.6 million. You're entitled for even more than that. So if users came in the appropriate configuration, you could have even more than the 1.6 million that we show. But what it validates is there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here, pardon the pun, so that you could really get a lot of users over time satisfied without having to increase your investment in that infrastructure. A couple of important things. We also outlined that existing 19 acres of right-of-way for those roadways. We, as a due diligence officer, if I were the fellow that were hired by a company to look at that, we wouldn't be counting any of those rights-of-way, even though it's within the total parcel acreage. It's one of those little confusing things that might be better to make more clear. And the other thing that we show is there that floodplain mitigation area we reflected, that 15.2 acres allows the development of all of those other parcels within that floodplain without any further mitigation. That's the good news. You've got tremendous investment in the community so far. The remarkable thing is it's very easy to take this information, now that it is electronic, and in an easy to understand format, and accumulate that, and with a click of the button, have that in the hands of whomever we're looking. The thing to remember about Lindsay's example, 105 sites had to get narrowed down in a matter of days. So 105 binders were mounted up on a desk, and any of them that were inconsistent or confusing got eliminated. Their job is to get rid of them quickly. So if your information, like for example the zoning information, if any of it may be compatible, which as this turns out it completely is, but the way that the information may be available online, if it is confusing, it puts you at a disadvantage, because much of the investigations are done remotely, and they'll look at your data before they ever talk to you, because they can do that at their own pace, which is usually far quicker. So the idea of making a bit of investment, and grant money is likely available to be able to invest in those facilities such that you're one click away from a clear and consistent message to those that want to invest, because you've already made the big dollars of investment in your infrastructure.
We didn't, they did.
So that's a huge advantage. Don't miss capitalizing on it.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, are you an industrial developer?
No, sir. I'm a civil engineer.
Civil engineer, okay. No, he's not just like you, Randy. You're up here and he's down there. Okay, all right.
Great. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you might have of Lindsay or myself.
John?
Yeah, we were talking about the flood zone mitigation strategy that was inside the 240 acres.
If you will, come on up, John, because
Okay.
I'm sure folks at home are going to want to hear this as well.
Think any of them listening?
Everybody's
I didn't say that. No, if you were to take the flood mitigation area that you had inside of the 240 acres. Since the MacArthur's and NG Wade own a lot of property around, couldn't some of that, could that mitigation area, and by the same line of reasoning, take the stormwater facilities and create a regional stormwater facility for the PUD and be able to increase the density inside the park itself? Does that make sense?
I think I understand the question. Let's see. With regard to the floodplain, I'm going to go back to this. I think I'm going to go back to this. It's not being very happy with me right now. I know it's not. It's not you. You did it much better than I did. For example, that's an isolated flood zone in the FEMA maps. So the mitigation is very difficult to get permitted outside that zone. So if you have a floodplain here and you want to mitigate somewhere else, it's difficult to be able to have one offset the other.
Closed basin.
That's exactly right. So in these matters here, I would suggest that the central facility within that area is the most effective way. That would be the best way to minimize that green blob so that more of the area outside it, but within that blue dashed line, could be developed.
I would strongly recommend they nail that, delineate exactly where that flood line is. It may be a half the size of that.
And my experience is it's usually very different, but it's not always favorable.
Perpendicular to contour line.
Oh, yeah.
Flood line, and it just doesn't do that.
It's our federal money at work for us. With regard to the stormwater facilities, I don't have the same recommendation there. The nature of these facilities are small, relatively inexpensive to construct, and if you took the alternative, if you forced the development pattern such that a central facility could accommodate all of that storm drainage, it would likely result in very large areas of mass grading that may not be consistent with the infrastructure, the road elevations that you've already got. So you would have to spend that money now, and you may not be consistent with the development pattern that might want to come. So it might be a contrary investment in additional infrastructure that might not help you in the future. These smaller facilities at each one of these independent users will be inexpensive and customary. They'll expect to spend that money when they build their facility.
Since we were so low, I mean, all those check marks were in the low category. I mean, we've been working years since I came the first time in 1994, trying to do something with this property. What is really the likelihood of finding somebody that's compatible that would use this property? Is there somebody out there that could use it?
Well, the problem is manufacturing is just one line up there, but there's so much in manufacturing. So I think from your standpoint of who would come here, is focusing on some of those manufacturing industries.
That's who we need to focus on trying to get the word to.
Yes.
However we do that. I heard you say put it on the website, the economic development website. I just quickly looked up economic development for Florida, and Wakulla's not even in there. It lists all these other counties, but Wakulla's not one of them. I don't know how we get in there, but
you're talking the Enterprise Florida website?
Stateofflorida.com, and you go to economic development, and the economic development offices. It's got a whole list of those offices, but Wakulla's not one of them. So how do we get there?
You just added an item to your short-term recommendation list.
So, my name is Richard Williams. I'm the Executive Director of Opportunity Florida, and Wakulla County is one of the counties that we serve. And so there's a couple things, and I'll start off with answering that question. You need to have a designated economic developer. I'm not from Enterprise Florida, but I can tell you the first thing that they look for is who does the county have as a designated economic developer.
I've been preaching that wide open.
Well, if you don't have one, then they have nobody to list. I will tell you that we have, for a couple of our counties, while they're in an interim basis, we've actually taken on that role temporarily as a part of just, you're a member, you pay. We recently did it for Jackson County. They switched from one organization to another organization, and while they were in that interim period, and it was about 6 months, if I remember correctly, we served in that role for them, so we
we actually, any leads that came in, anything that was worked, that came through us, and then we went out and we developed a local team and worked with that local team for any of the projects, and we actually worked several. So there's that, but you're going to have somebody. And from our side of the fence too, and you know, she talked about a couple of times where there's maybe weeks, or we've had projects before that have come in that we've locally developed where we literally had 2 days to come up with certain information. If we don't have a local contact, it makes it so much tougher on us. And you've got a volunteer that does a wonderful job, but there's just, it's not the same. And two, whenever you go out and you bring somebody in and you say, well, here's our volunteer, that's different. It sends a different message out there. In terms of the database, and I've already communicated with the landlords there, if you'll get us that information, we have a database that we will keep, or that we do keep, of sites. If we've got that information, our database loads right up into Enterprise Florida. So work with us, get us that information. We'll work with you to do that if that's what you want to do. And then that automatically gets out on the state site. And then you mentioned the labor survey. That's something else from an Opportunity Florida standpoint. You tell me where you want it done from. We've got the ability to do that. Then what we'd also want to do, though, is we also want to go in and we want to look at the local education system, both from the college, university in this case, and then your school district, and what's available there for training. So that we make sure that we understand what's available for training, because a lot of times with companies, if you've got something there, that the way Florida works with, especially with workers' comp, and what people list sometimes as job duties versus what you've actually got people that can do, don't necessarily match up. So for example, when Family Dollar came in up in Jackson County, we showed no forklift operators, and it almost cost us the project. So we had to go out and figure out other ways to show that we actually did have those. So, you know, we'll work with you on that. You're already a member. I'm not sitting here saying, we'll pay us more money and we'll do this. And like I said, on a temporary basis, if you need us to step in, we'll be glad to do that. So.
As far as the economic development director goes, David, sounds to me like Summer's got her a new job description. You say.
When David and I have talked about it, I think it's going to come down to the board deciding, you know, when David and I talked about it, it's dollars and cents. We got to pay somebody to do that. And the board's got to be willing to fund such an operation because it's important to the development of the county. If that's not important to us, then we just keep chugging along like we are, and hopefully one day somebody will find us. I don't think that's going to happen until we get
I would ask the question though, if I owned Opportunity Park, I'd be busting my tail out there marketing that property. I know that the gentleman who owns Opportunity Park's got more money than God, but why hasn't he been able to market that property? It's to his interest, and he's got millions of dollars invested, and it just bothers me that we may be asked to market a property that the owner has been unable to market for all these years. I do understand why you need a marketing person, because I market retail. That's what I do. And in the last 6 years, we've had, I market retail every month. I've got about 20 companies that I market to. And 4 of those companies have already built in the county, and there's 5 more that's on the way. And that's sort of like a full-time job. But to hire a marketing director to promote a site that's been sitting there for 20 years, and we're low on the totem pole on all those things, is spending a lot of dollars. In your presentation, no, that's okay. In your presentation, you showed that in our employment, we were 7-point-something% or something. Our unemployment rate, though, is only 3.8. So we wouldn't be on a scale of hiring a lot of folks because we don't have anybody available to hire. We have an industry on the coast right now that can't find workers. Our oyster industry, the people who are developing oysters, they can't find employees. So it's a problem I have, that the owner of the property hasn't done something with this. Where is his position?
And you're right, that would be the question I asked. How motivated and how committed are Sandy and you guys on moving this property? If they're motivated, then we could get motivated, but until they're motivated to do it and are going to put it up on the mark, because he's right, Jerry's spot on.
Well, like I said, the due diligence part, I mean, I know a person
Elbert
Well,
could do
that's
all.
beside the point.
But that we
the-
paid for by
Yeah, that's to
private
pay
side.
for it by the developer, but how motivated is Mr. MacArthur sitting over there? How motivated are they, and they're going to be competitive in the marketplace to move this?
I find,
That's got to be a commitment before we spend any money.
I find that in my working with retail companies, I call a retail company and I'm trying to get a hold of the person who makes the decision. They don't even talk to me. They don't even talk to me. About 3 years ago, I took 400 signatures to Publix. And they sent a guy out to talk to me, and I had an appointment, and I was bringing these signatures of people who wanted Publix in the county, 400 sheets of paper. They sent a guy out to talk to me who didn't even know where Tallahassee was. Then I started working with developers and working with several different developers, telling them what an opportunity it is to come down to Wakulla and let me show you Wakulla. Come down, let me show you, and take a look. And it changed the whole system. But marketing to that's why I asked you if you were an industrial developer. If you're going to market, you market to the people like Patillo out of Atlanta who builds sites with no tenants. If he isn't going to build a site, prior to having a tenant, then maybe he doesn't feel like this is really the place, because when they're spending their money, they're serious about the opportunity to.
But we're not just talking, guys, we're not just talking, I want to let you speak, sir, but we're not just talking about Opportunity Park. We're talking about Wakulla as a whole. There's a lot of things that I'd like to have us come here, like Publix and like a Lowe's or like a Home Depot, or just name them all. They're not going to all go to Opportunity Park, but I believe we need a person that's a contact. No offense to you, John. You've done this for years for no pay, and we'll double your pay. But if you'll do better,
You got a raise today.
the bottom line is that we, if we can go after and market. I'm not worried about Opportunity Park necessarily.
Neither am I. Neither am I. It's just.
Let's hear from this gentleman. We got about 15 minutes left.
I don't think I've had a chance to introduce myself. My name's Rich Exline, and I work for NG Wade. I've been there for about a year, but I've known the MacArthur family for the better half of my life. I heard about Opportunity Park when I started at NG Wade last year, when I was going through boxes upon boxes of invoices and statements and maps and surveys and all the accumulation of 20 plus years of work going into this. But then in 2008, everything kind of died down, and it wasn't a good investment at the time. We just had to hold it. To answer your specific question, why aren't we marketing? What are we doing? Well, we're here now. I'm here now, and I see it as a great opportunity. Sandy MacArthur Jr. sees it as a great opportunity, and what we need is the county to get behind us also. In 2018, if a CEO of a company is looking at different sites and he pulls up that GIS map and we don't have a GIS map or it's not lined up right, he's just moving on to the next thing. So it's really hard for us to push and market and make that expenditure if we don't have the support from the county for the things we cannot control. So that's what we're here for, and I'm really, really happy that Duke and all the supporting staff really helped us learn what we're missing so we can get it there and so we can get people there besides just CSG.
Do you have a list of these things?
Of what? Yes.
There's certain, like the GIS thing, I'd like to at least know what you guys are asking for in the form.
Absolutely. I'm glad to build up a bullet list for you guys to consider. And one of the things that we keep hearing every time we talk about developing Opportunity Park is Wakulla needs that economic development person. So I appreciate you guys helping us and hearing us out today, but we really want to see good things for Wakulla.
Thank you, sir. John, come on up.
Basically back up what Mike just said regarding an economic developer. Gadsden County, one of our competitors, the capital region, there's three of us, Gadsden, Leon, and Wakulla. I'm out on the peripheries of it, the volunteer here. Gadsden County's been eating our lunch. They don't have near the education facility we have, but they do have an economic developer that goes out And that person, it's not just going to conferences and stuff like that. She goes in the door. She walked into Capital Hydraulics here about a year or so ago. Heard they weren't happy with Leon County and the city of Tallahassee because of their growth management problems, and then people, there you go, and wanted to find another place. She walked in the door and just hand walked them through the process. They're at 9010 Park now. They may not have been where we would have wanted them to have been, but she knew them because she's from Tallahassee, and she used to be president of the Chamber of Commerce up there and was in their economic development organization before the city of Tallahassee just took it over here recently. But she goes and knocks on doors, and we need that person to go and knock on doors, not just for Opportunity Park, but we have a park in St. Mark's. We have other few industrial sites around where people could be located. There's a few properties in here that person could be working with the zoning department to change zoning on places. Mark and I talked about a data mining center here just a month or two ago that we were thinking about, or he was thinking about putting right next to the St. Mark's transfer facility. There's about a 10-acre piece of property that's out of the flood zone. It's almost like an island in the sea right there that could be fixed because huge amount of power at that substation. And it would be just perfect location for that kind of a ordinance. There's a lot of things that could be done if we would consider it. It's not just Opportunity Park.
When you speak of Gadsden, though, they have rail and an interstate.
They do. They got a terrible school system. They don't have a quality of life.
That's right.
There are, as Lindsay put up, there's pluses and minuses to every place. And I think our pluses outweigh. Now, we're not going to get the heavy industry. We won't get the concrete because we don't have the rail. But there are lots of other things that get made nowadays that don't have to have that. And we may not be, and I don't know if there's any, if you get any extra credit here, but we are 17 miles from the interstate, but Commerce Opportunity Park's only about 5 miles from a 6-lane highway, the Capitol Circle.
And the old Plank Road was specifically paved for that development.
It was.
Okay. Going up
Grant.
W.W. Kelly, it turns into W.W. Kelly and then dumps on 27. Yeah.
State grant.
So admitted, and that's one of our challenges as our EDC is been Opportunity Park, and the fact that yes, it did sit there for 20 years. Yes, there are lots of mitigating circumstances there. A bad economy for 10 years. There's some illness in the family. Lots of other irons in the fire. But I see a little bit more commitment now. And so something to think about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we probably want to take a quick break.
One more thing, if
our
I
next
could.
meeting.
I'm also chair of the Appalachia Regional Planning Council, where the gentleman was at. And maybe at some point you guys, Duke, could give a presentation. That's 9 counties, and we talk about stuff like this all the time. We're trying to get rail spurs done in the port, all that kind of stuff. So I'll let them get with you guys.
This was an outstanding presentation. I appreciate you having them come. And
Absolutely.
Thank y'all.
Very good.
Good job.
Very good.
Thank you for the
Stick around for the board
great
meeting,
turnout,
you'll get bored.
all the hard work you guys are putting into it.
One other thing that I forgot to mention just then, I'll try to say it loud enough. There's been a lot of talk about this, our lack of workforce. I know, just being in the construction industry all my life, and I always did my work up in Tallahassee. It's generally a commercial or institutional project, and we would hire big subcontractors in Tallahassee, but everybody that came out with a job was from Wakulla County. We've got people down here that are willing to work, but they have to go to Tallahassee to get a job. I call it, that's our latent workforce.
They'd rather stay down here if they could.
Yeah.
I'll make that dry. Thank you all for coming out. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing this thing grow in the future. Thank you. We will stand adjourned, and BOCC meeting starts at 5 p.m.